you saw Russia-Ukraine war was going on, SWIFT was stopped for Russia. So you will have to, with the way we own digital public infrastructure in India, we'll have to create a cognitive public infrastructure, howsoever difficult it is. And that's why pair, it's visceral, it's existential, and we will have to do it. And probably it's time that we should do it. I yesterday wrote an article in the Sunday Guardian, where I called it the architecture of independence, right? It is the architecture of independence. There's no dearth of, experts in India. There's no dearth of talent in India. There's no dearth of, the only thing is compute, which I think geopolitically we should solve. That again is sovereignty, right? Because people are using GPUs to control geopolitics. And that is why we will have to be sovereign at all the layers of the cake.
Right.
And I believe that when you apply these systems to policing, you will have to go for trust and transparency. And it has created problems. On the other side, it's become a force multiplier. It has hugely enabled the criminal ecosystem. We have polymorphic malware. You have, there was a company called ARUP, I think it's an advertisement company or something, where the CEO came on a live Zoom call and they lost $30 million, right? This is the state at which AI is evolving. Do we have real-time policing? Sir, explained that policing is not so real-time. So you will have to increase both capability and capacity, and this needs a serious thought right now. So pair, we need sovereign AI.
Thank you, sir. And again, as expected, very, very relevant points. So that reminds me of interview by Jensen Huang a few years back. He said, I met your prime minister all before this AI hype, when it's about in very initial stages. And he said, your prime minister told me that I don't want to export data to import intelligence. He said that was really remarkable for a world leader to think in those times. So I think very relevant points you also echoed, but good that, sir, you brought compute in picture, because compute is something where we really have to make progress. In fact, the rest of the world. And then I would love to bring pair maybe at later stage. So with this, then I would like to move to Martin. Martin, thanks a lot, first of all, traveling all the way to India to attend the AI Summit and being with us. Martin, in your role as in Teradata, as a leader in data analytics, big data implementation, you have been quoted twice in Data IQ's 100 most influential people in data-driven business. And what's remarkable, I was looking at your website where you are now saying that stop managing data, activate intelligence. So, and I also read your article about the large-scale compute requirement which is going to come. For example, you gave a healthcare example where every patient will be followed by an agent, and he'll be firing like thousands, hundreds and thousands of queries to make sure that you have that hyper personalization experience. So with that kind of compute requirement, Martin, do you think that we are ready for sovereignty from day one, or is going, or as everybody said, you have to tackle it layer-wise? So what do you think, especially when you come to the layer of data? How the data structures a country like India can make sure that they are sovereign in those aspects. Yeah. So over to you.
Thank you, and good morning, everybody. Lovely to be here. There's a lot to unpack in your question, and we should come back and we should talk about the implications of potentially millions of agents running thousands of queries, because I think that is a very important consequence of where we're going that we should think about. But you're absolutely right. At Teradata, we think that the first and the most fundamental layer is the data layer. There is no good AI without good data, so it's incredibly important we get that right. And there are some principles that have proven to be more or less timeless. And if I speak about timeless in terms of IT, I'm speaking, they've proven to be good over 3 or 4 decades. That's the kind of event horizon, isn't it, for technology? So we need to focus on capturing the most detailed data that we can. We need to make sure that we are capable of integrating that data so that we can solve complex problems across domains, I guess in defense, air, space, maritime, land, cyber, increasingly. That requires that we can connect the dots. And then we need to expose a simplified representation of that data so that a hard-pressed individual operating under pressure can make sense of the data, and also so that we can, as we increasingly open that data platform to agents, so we reduce the risk of hallucination for the agents as well. So those are 3 principles that I think have stood the test of time. When we think about a modern data foundation, and we tend to use this word data modernization a lot right now in the industry, a difficult term. I think I would say that data modernization can mean whatever the vendor sat across you wants to sell you that day, so we should be careful with the term. But I think there are two things that are really important in this idea of data modernization. The first is this idea of open table formats. And the promise of open table formats is that we can store more data, more reliably, and crucially more cost effectively. And cost effective is important. I was speaking to the Ministry of Defense at one of the smaller European nations last week. Their next generation AI data platform that they envisage to integrate those 5 domains, they think will be a minimum of 2.5 petabytes of data. For a country of the size complexity of India, I think you can multiply that by at least 10. So being able to store large volumes of data and to fuse that data, that sensor data, cost effectively is very important. But the more important consequence of open table formats is this idea of interoperability. This idea that we cannot possibly predict, sat here in this room today, which models and which technologies will be the most important 4 or 5 years from now. And this idea that different technologies, different processing engines have different strengths and weaknesses for different applications. And so we need to be able to support many of them. And so the idea of having a data foundation that we can bring multiple tools to is incredibly important in that conversation. The other modernization conversation that's very important is data products, but we probably don't have time for that discussion today. And then that brings us to why are we building this data foundation? Well, we're building this data foundation so that we can bring AI to that data foundation, and increasingly so we can bring agentic AI to that foundation. And I think there are a couple of things that are important to think through there. The first is I think we can get very wrapped up around the idea of training models, around training the best model, around training our own model. I think that's a little bit of a trap, honestly. When I look at the performance of the open source models, they're generally only 6 months behind the proprietary models. So right now, the open source models are catching up with the proprietary models inside 6 months. And those open source models, we can inspect the architecture, we can inspect the weights, so we can be pretty confident in those models. And so I think we should focus less on training our own models and think more about inference. A good model that I can score quickly and cost effectively is better 9 times out of 10 than the best model that I can't get out of the lab and into production. So we should focus on inference first. We should also think about the diversity of models. There was a really interesting paper by NVIDIA last year called Small Models of the Future of Agentic AI. And in that paper, they pointed out that smaller models are often cheaper to score, faster to score, and can be less prone to hallucination when they're focused on a task-specific problem. So better, cheaper, faster, and more reliable. That's a pretty good trade, right? So we should think about not having one single model to rule them all. We need to start thinking about the models that are available to us as a box of tools. And when we have a box of tools, we shouldn't always reach for the hammer just because it's the biggest, shiniest tool in the box. And then the last thing that I think is particularly relevant in a defense and a security context is I've been in this industry for a little over 30 years now, and mostly we've been concerned with structured data, with rows and columns of numeric data. And the great promise of AI that we're seeing play out already is that we can now apply these models to unstructured data, to images, to audio, to text. And we can have multimodal intelligence. And this is incredibly important. So at Teradata, for example, we've always worked with defense agencies around supply chain optimization, to your point, around predictive maintenance. Today in Teradata, we can support very complex maritime surveillance applications where we take large volumes of detailed data across multiple sensor types and fuse that intelligence for maritime surveillance. We can assess camouflage effectiveness. I think you made the point earlier that high-value assets are increasingly vulnerable to loitering munitions, relatively inexpensive loitering munitions. So we can capture images of camouflaged assets like tanks and assess camouflage effectiveness to protect those assets. And these are applications that would not have been possible even 3, 4, 5 years ago. So the pace of change and innovation is spectacular and exciting.
Thank you, Martin. I think what really stood out to me is that in our quest for sovereignty, I think using open source data model is really important because you get to inspect the architecture. No matter who's created it, at least that aspect can be bring into sovereignty very early on. And also it resonates with General Shiba earlier said, building superior algorithms on top of it. Yeah. Great. So now I come to Preet Saxena. Preet is the director of global data analytics in Concentrix, recognized as one of the 10 most influential leader, awarded as one of the women leaders in AI, and looks after the entire Gen AI initiative across the world from Concentrix. So Preet, great to have you here, and thanks for coming. So, Preet, what we would like your inputs is on the public and private collaboration, and you have been at the forefront of it. So, what do you think are the right models where both the teams can work together with the larger focus on bringing sovereignty across layers of AI? Over to you.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks, Abhishek. Am I audible? Okay,
Yeah.
great. So, good morning, everyone. So, I would just like to answer it by having very small blocks to the entire ecosystem of data, AI, and analytics. So, starting from data, which is the main thing, the bread and butter on which all the layers are added on top of it, as you mentioned rightly, capturing the right data, having the right form of governance is absolutely important. I think starting from residency, the data residency aspect, in which India has already initiated the DPDP Act, which is very, very absolutely relevant, and that would be the first foundational layers to it. So once we have ensured that all our healthcare data, PI information, all the transactions we are made are residing in our own country, that's a foundational layer in terms of residency. Then we need to have the right layer of governance on top of it. And when I say governance, like, do we have any biasness in the data? Are we capturing in the right formats, right shape? So that is absolutely important because data governance is gonna be the next key thing for your success for any program, any analytics or AI program that you run across. Now here, when we have the data residency solved, governance solved, and then on top of it we try to apply any AI models on top of it. And I completely agree to your point which you said, like, open source are much speedy to market, we should leverage that, but with all the relevant guardrails. So here I believe public and private partnership can have a great role. Like, can we have a challenge based programs, can we have some hackathons in which public sector also and private sector also come across with various prototypes, and those prototypes can later on be put into mass productions, but that can be a great collaborative formats. And because open source these days are like very, very speedy to the market, they are actually solving the real problems, and they are coming up with very innovative concepts that we haven't thought of enough. So here I feel like public private collaboration can really be of help, and there are various you can say unique models to curl that out, be it challenge based, be it hackathons, or in any other formats. So once we have the AI layer sorted out and have the relevant models built, then comes the consumption layer. Now, as my fellow panelist was saying, like, there is no industry today right now which is not affected by AI. You name any industry, we have the analytics use cases. Why? Because we have the right set of techniques, especially in defense area. Any anomaly detection, any pattern recognition, we can put the right alarms, right setups. Okay, this is something which is going off the track, and this we should highlight, we should raise the relevant alerts. So in those mechanisms, the user, especially in the defense sector, is absolutely important and can be done on real time. Now all of this is you can say encapsulated with the ecosystem layer, and what we call it as, like, you can call it as an ESG layer, because as we are building the Indian sovereignty track to build our own AIs, we need to be absolutely cognizant of the fact what kind of carbon footprints, while we are creating our own data centers, building our own clouds, what kind of footprints we are having. So somewhere in back of this journey, we should be cognizant of these facts as well, how ESG can actually have an impact in this entire ball game. So that's all my thoughts, Abhishek. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Preet. I think, yeah, my takeaway from you is that open source but with guardrails, quick to go to market, innovative. Yeah. And you also talked about the consumption layer, but most importantly, you came towards the end on the ESG side of it. I'm very sure we are going to have one more session sometime in future on ESG, and we'd love to invite you and express your thoughts. Because after all, data centers, wherever we read, US or anywhere, local communities are, they are really affected by it. Thank you so much, Preet. Okay, so towards the end, I come to Mandar. Last but not the least, Mandar is the National Security Officer of Microsoft India and Asia Pacific, and is at the forefront of Microsoft's security initiatives, including cyber. So, Mandar, your thoughts about adoption of AI in general, because your platform, as we say, various layers. While that layer can be addressed later, but whatever is built on top of it is actually what we debated can be, the early adopters of sovereign AI. So over to you, Mandar.
Right. Thanks. I think interesting, and I have the advantage of speaking after everybody. So,
you have.
so I will. I'll just take one more minute, right? I think a lot of speakers before me talked about sovereignty and different words used, visceral and emotional and all that, right? I think, in my opinion, sovereignty has been obscured or confused by a lot of interest, right? And interest from everybody, from government, from tech companies, and uh, of course, general audience, right? But sovereignty, and in my role, I work with a lot of governments, including the Indian government. I had privilege of working with some of the Indian defense folks as well. Sovereignty is fairly simple, right? Essentially, it's four layers. The layer number one is data, right? Data sovereignty. We whole started with data residency, but then given the geopolitical situation and some of the incidents, we actually now talk about data sovereignty. How is my data protected? Nobody else has access. Nobody else has jurisdictional access to my data, right? That's data sovereignty. The second layer is operational sovereignty. A couple of speakers before me spoke about how can nobody else switch me off, right? Operational sovereignty is fairly simple, so that my business can continue. I can continue to trust that cloud or AI without somebody else having ability to switch off. Tech, this is where things become a little complicated and interesting. Right? Tech sovereignty means I should be able to build on top of that, right? I'll not get into debate of closed source, open source, commercial, right? But that's where the issue starts happening, because tech also means the tech has to be not only in my control, but it has to be good, right? The classic example, classic debate that we get, again, we have eminent defense folks, so I'll refer to that, right? Is India willing to wait 10 years for AMCA to come, fifth generation fighter, or is India willing to buy Rafale to fill that gap, right? Uh, Sovereign aircraft, maybe we wait 10 years, but we have needs today. That's where the tech sovereignty becomes a very, very interesting point.
Mandar, sorry to pitch in, but just interesting input. The AMCA is coming with 50% indigenization.
Sure, 50%.
And sir would agree with me.
No, absolutely. I'm saying AMCA
I'm
is
just
great.
drawing a parallel. Yeah.
No, I'm saying AMCA is great, but AMCA will come maybe 10
Sorry,
years.
not AMCA. Rafale is coming with 50% indigenization.
Yeah, of course, yeah. So, but the point I'm making is AMCA is 10 years away. Would we want 50% Indianization and use Rafale today? Now, that's the balance on tech, right? If we insist on every layer has to be India, then we probably will have to wait, right? That's the balance. And finally, the AI sovereignty, right? The fourth layer, which was not on top of everybody's mind, right? The three layers have been talked for pretty much for a long time. The data, the operation and tech sovereignty, even in the cloud world, but AI sovereignty came. Now, AI sovereignty is a little bit more complicated than cloud sovereignty or any other tech sovereignty, right? Why? Because I think speakers before me spoke, so I'll not go detail there, but AI brings a perspective, right? That means the data that it is trained on has to have the Indian perspective, right? It needs to have all the nuances, which in the first three layers were not so much. So data sovereignty is not only whether it is running in India, whether it is developed by Indians, it's also is it trained on Indian ethics, is it trained on Indian languages and all that. So I think AI sovereignty is a step beyond that, right? Yep. And because most of the models are like black blocks, explainability is a challenge, I think that's where AI sovereignty becomes extremely important, right? Sure. And that's where I again agree with what I think Peter, you mentioned the small language models, Martin, sorry, you mentioned small language model, purpose-built models are probably making more sense. I think that's the way we think generally of sovereignty, right? The question that we need to all look at is sovereignty is not binary. It's not 0 or 1, right, as it is typically made out to be. It's a spectrum. Different departments, different organizations, different applications need different level of sovereignty. Somewhere you need to have operations control versus somewhere you will have to end-to-end the stack, like in defense needs to be developed ourselves, right? The final point that I'll make here is See, life has come full circle. Those who are in IT for maybe 25 odd years, we saw mainframe where computing was centralized, to distributed computing where computing was distributed, to cloud where again that computing became little centralized. Now we are talking, when cloud started 10, 15 years back, right, all the big techs believed that there are going to be 5 regions in the world, right? Somewhere in Europe, somewhere in Asia, somewhere in US, and everybody will use cloud from those 5 regions. Today, reality is Microsoft has 75 regions, right? So we moved from 5 regions literally 10 years back to 75 regions. I think it's time to take the next step where we are saying the region is not only in my control, but the region is also in customer's data center. So I think what we will see happening in tech is that the sovereign clouds will become a reality, right? For example, in Microsoft, we have now created something called a sovereign private cloud, which can run in customer's own data center under complete customer control, disconnected, air gapped. We did not do that maybe 2 years back. That's the reality, right? We kept on talking about software-defined sovereignty until about a year back.
Yeah.
Today we are saying, okay, we have a full stack sovereign private cloud. And I'm taking Microsoft as an example. Our competition and other companies also have similar
No, that's
models.
a very valid point, Manda. In fact, competition like SAP is already deployed sovereign cloud, and that's the way to
That's
go.
sovereign public.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is sovereign private, which can run in an air-gapped environment in defense.
Of course, of
And
course.
that's a reality because last point, we will have to take us out of the equation, the zero trust model, right?
Yeah.
You don't even need to trust the company that gives you tech. That's the only way we can build confidence.
Thank you. Right, very valid point, Mandar, and it was important to bring the industry perspective here to complete the full picture. Ladies and gentlemen, we have almost run out of time. I would request Pierre to give his closing remarks, and then we'll conclude the session. Pierre, over to you.
Okay, so try to keep it brief. So what we have been discussing here, we would say it's, when we talk about sovereignty and AI, it's openness versus security, the trade-offs, speed of innovation versus governance, global integration versus autonomy, public infrastructure versus private innovation. So these are the extremes, and what I wish would be for India would be if you could have something in the middle of these extremes. So the best of, let's say, the EU and the US. EU very much regulatory driven, regulatory first, innovation second, etc. And the US probably innovation first, and then, well, some control from the government anyway that comes. So if that would be something for India, I think this is a good route to take. You said it, collaborative models, to invest in infrastructure, something like centers of excellence, where public and private come together to solve the real world problems in architecture, in healthcare, and all these kind of things. So if that would be a route for India, I would be more than glad, and it brings the best together from both worlds.
Thank you, Pierre. So towards the end of the session, I'll request all speakers to please come forward. We are releasing a background paper. I would request Nilachal Mishra and Akhilesh Tutija from KPMG to please come up as well. Thank you. Shobit, please.